Take a good look at this face. Have you ever seen him before? This man looks completely normal. It's very possible that next weekend he'll be standing in the pub right behind you. The call warning, accompanied by a quarter-page newspaper portrait, appeared in the London Sunday Express. The day before, a smaller photograph was published by most other English newspapers. These days, the British, when they find themselves on the street, entering a store, or sitting in a chair in a cinema, persistently try on a photograph to match the faces of other passers-by, buyers and spectators. The matter is serious. A reward of £250,000 sterling has been promised to those who discover this man. The general physiognomy has overcome the country. I don't have views of £250,000, but I also look and gaze into the face of this 40-year-old man of enormous height, athletic build, in impeccable suit, confident in himself. Pure curiosity and also sports passion. Will he really go away again? This is an old story. Arriving in London 2 years ago, I caught her last action. However, the curtain has not yet fallen. The beginning of the famous story was laid by the operation of 13 attackers, unique in its audacity and precision of execution. On August 8, 1963, they stopped a mail train by switching on a false red traffic signal near Cheddington. £2.5 million were stolen during the lighting raid. Scotland Yard coped with the search for the robbers, but out of £2.5 million. But only a few 100,000 were found. Millions have disappeared. It was impossible to implement them in a relatively short period of time. Where did they go? The banks that owned the stolen money demanded answers. He wasn't there. In July 1965, the hidden millions reminded themselves for the first time. There was an escape at Unsworth Prison. 4 prisoners managed to make their way to a 10-meter high wall and overcome it using a rope ladder carefully thrown to them by someone. The 2 fugitives soon after fell into the hands of the police. The other 2 disappeared into the thin air. One of them, for the sake of whom they escaped, was called Ronald Bix. He was one of the 13 who robbed the mail train. As the organizer of the raid, he was sentenced to a maximum term of 30 years in prison. Bix served only 15 months of that. Capturing the last one, the 13th, became Scotland Yard's #1 task. Bix was the last hope that the key to the mystery of the missing millions would ever be discovered. For more than 4 years there was neither a word nor a breath about Bix. Wherever they looked for him, no matter what means they resorted to pick up the trail, nothing, not a glimmer. They have already began to forget about him. And then, in October 1969, a bomb exploded. Bix in Australia. For more than 3 years, he and his family lived quietly in a cozy house on the outskirts of Melbourne. Bix, of course, bore someone else's name, but lived unshamedly, in grand style. The fact that 13 felt safe can be judged by the various signs. During this time, 2 more sons were added to his family, making a total of 3. The Bix led a social lifestyle, received guests, stayed in restaurants until late at night. traveled. They could be seen at a fashionable Mediterranean resort in the Middle East, in Hong Kong. One is equally amazed by Big's audacity, confident that in the world he lives in, money makes him invulnerable, and by the short-sightedness of Interpol. However, Biggs was arrested once. He was accused of gross violation of traffic rules, and they let him go. How did Biggs get exposed? This is another mystery in a long story. Another one arose on October 18, 1969, when a house on the outskirts of Melbourne was surrounded on all sides by heavily armed police. It turned out to be in vain. Ronald Biggs had slipped away 5 hours earlier. Someone very knowledgeable warned him of the danger. 4 days later, he was busted again, this time at a motel leaving Melbourne. And again, the disappointment of the Australian Sherlock Holmeses. In the room in which Biggs spent 2 days, they found a couple of his suitcases, coats, and expensive suits. Therefore, he was in a hurry, but someone warned him this time too. Who? Biggs' wife, Chairman, a respectable and attractive lady, was arrested. She was accused of using a false passport. 3 children were temporarily sheltered by friends. A few days later, Mrs. Biggs was released. And then something completely amazing began. Newspapers, radio and television reporters fought to be the first to get Chairman's story. The Australian Television Corporation took over. Mrs. Biggs, who complained that during their ruinous underground life her family had spent a lot of money, received £35,000 from the corporation. In his entire life, for all his works, Charles Dickens, for example, did not receive even half of this amount. Ronald Biggs, meanwhile, fell through the ground again. A message flashed that he had flown somewhere on a private plane. Nothing was heard from him for 5 months. Then Biggs stunned the crowd once again. London evening newspapers were chucked with the sensation. The 13th in England. Scotland Yard confirmed the fact. The official version is as follows. Spanish authorities arrested a Gibraltar resident, the owner of 2 ocean-going yachts, after catching him transporting contraband goods to the port of Algeciras. During the interrogation, it turned out that shortly before this, the smuggler transported an English passenger on one of his yachts from Australia to England. The arrested man swore that he had not the slightest idea about the identity of the stranger who generously paid him. But from his description, Scotland Yard employees concluded, Biggs. So a new riddle. What made Ronald Biggs, a sober and prudent man, take this seemingly reckless step of going home? There are at least 3 different versions. According to one of them, the loving raider came to the British shores, dear to his heart, to see his friend woman who remained here. Another theory, quite realistic and most intriguing for Scotland Yard, has purely financial basis. Millions, albeit slightly emaciated, even broken into pieces, are resting somewhere. Having shaken up the exported capital, Biggs returned to replenish supplies. The third explanation follows from the previous one. It is based on the assumption of betrayal. Let us recall the circumstances of the collecting escape from Wandsworth prison in 1965, along with Biggs, in addition to the two who soon fell into the hands of the police, again, was a criminal named Eric Flower. When he moved to Australia, Biggs took him with him. Why on earth? It is obvious that Flower should be with him all the time, so that he does not betray him. Let us return to Biggs' surprise revelation in Melbourne. Wasn't it Flower who gave him away after all? This option is all the more reasonable since another interesting circumstance has also become known. A few days later, after Biggs was captured and fled, Flower himself was arrested. The police caught him after an anonymous phone call. Only one person could call: Biggs. Now the most important thing. Why did Flower need to hand over Biggs? Money. Flower apparently had his own plans for the stolen capital. At the same time, it is possible that he acted as an instrument of the London companions of the 13 who wanted to get rid of this contender for millions. The need to settle financial affairs and at the same time to settle accounts with insidious associate, according to this latest version, brought Biggs to the British Isles. How successful he was in his mission is still unknown. The police are sure that in any case, Biggs is now rushing away from Britain to other continents with any disguise, mustache, beard, etc. With all the gigantic extent of London, where a person gets lost like a needle in a haystack, Biggs feels like he's on the coals here. At one time he made an unforgivable mistake. One of his friends, when they were frolicking together at a Spanish resort, filmed him. The film ended up in the possession of Scotland Yard. There they discovered that persistent talk about plastic surgery allegedly performed by Biggs immediately after escaping from prison was unfounded. He is still the same. The photograph, which has sold millions of copies around the world, was retaken from the film. All entries and exits from Britain were placed under tight control. By the way, one of the leaders of Scotland Yard complained that the search for participants in the mail train robbery, and above all the hunt for Biggs, cost the British Treasury another £2.5 million sterling. Money, money. The 13th is in a trap. But if he sneaks out again, it won't be a miracle. Biggs will simply prove once again that he knows how to manage capitals. April 1970. The chapter from the book Britain, Great and Little. Author Vitaly Kobysh.